Hello boys and girls, Pablum FishPig here to read you another simple story. Today's story is called Wobblejuice. Once there was a traveler who wanted a servant to go with him on his travels, and he saw several, but he didn't like any of them. But at last a man called Wobblejuice came to see him, and he didn't think he would do at all, because he was rather lame and only had one eye. But he had such a funny name that he thought he would like to talk to him. So he said, "Where did you get your name from?" And he said, "Well, I made it up." He said, "Then I think you might have made up a better one." And he said, "Well, perhaps I might." So he said, "Now let us come to business. How many languages can you talk?" And he said, "One." And he said, "Well, that isn't much use to me. Can you cook?" And he said, "Well, I was never much good at cooking, but I can boil an egg." He said, "I don't suppose there will be many eggs where I am going to, so that isn't much good. Can you clean boots well?" He said, "No, I was never much good at cleaning boots. The smell of blacking makes me sick." He said, "Well, you don't seem to be much good as a servant." And he said, "No, perhaps not." So he said, "Well, what can you do?" And he said, "Well, I can do one thing rather well. I can turn myself into any animal I like." Well, the traveler had never met anybody who could do that before, and he wasn't sure that Wobblejuice was telling the truth. But there was a mouse in the room, so he said, "Well, turn yourself into a cat and catch that mouse." So Wobblejuice turned himself into a cat, and it had only one eye and was lame in one leg, but that didn't matter because it had three others. And he caught the mouse, and then he turned himself into a man again. So the traveler said, "Well, I think you will be useful to me, and I will take you as my servant if we can agree about wages." And they agreed about wages and started on their travels. Well, they came to a great desert which nobody had ever crossed before, but Wobblejuice turned himself into a camel, and the traveler rode on him in the daytime. And in the evening, after they had had their supper, he turned himself into a nightingale and sang beautiful songs. And when the traveler went to sleep, he turned himself into a fierce dog and kept off the jackals and hyenas and all those animals. Well, that went on for some time, but they couldn't go as fast as the traveler had meant to, because when Wobblejuice was a camel, he was lame. And besides, he had to have some sleep after sitting up all night barking. So presently they came to an end of their food, and the traveler said, "Well, here we are in the desert, and it is a long way to the end of it still, and as we haven't got anything more to eat and drink, I suppose the only thing is for us to die, and I don't like it, and I wish you could think of something." So Wobblejuice said, "Oh, it is quite easy. I will turn myself into a hen, and lay plenty of eggs, and that will give us something to eat." And the traveler said, "Yes, that's all very well, but what about drinking?" And Wobblejuice said, "Oh, that will be all right. I will turn myself into a cow, and we shall have plenty of milk." So he did that, and sometimes he turned himself into a duck or a turkey so as not to get tired of the same kind of egg, and once he turned himself into a goat, but they didn't like that sort of milk, so he didn't do it again. And presently they came to the end of the desert. Well, then they had to go up a very steep mountain, and when they got high up it, there was only a very narrow path with a most horrible precipice on one side of it. And the traveler said, "I really can't go on any more. Precipices make me dizzy." And Wobblejuice said, "I have never cared much about precipices either, but this will be all right. I will turn myself into a mule, and you can sit on me sideways so you needn't look at the precipice." And the traveler said, "Well, that isn't a bad idea, but what about you? If you turn dizzy, we shall both fall over the precipice together, and I should go over backwards, and I shouldn't like that at all." And Wobblejuice said, "Oh, that will be all right, because I shall have my blind eye on the side of the precipice, and I shan't see it." So they got to the top of the mountain and sat down to rest, and then Wobblejuice said, "What have we come here for?" And the traveler said, "Well, I thought I should like to say I had been here, because nobody has ever been here before." And Wobblejuice said, "Well, why couldn't you say it instead of giving us all this trouble?" And the traveler said, "That's what I don't like about you. You think it doesn't matter telling lies. I suppose it is because you are always pretending to be something that you are not." So then they nearly quarreled, but Wobblejuice didn't want to quarrel because he rather liked the traveler by this time. They'd been so long together. So he said, "I dare say that is it. What are we going to do now?" The traveler said, "Well, we might go home again now. I have had enough of traveling for the present." Wobblejuice said, "Oh, very well, but we must find another way down this mountain, or else my blind eye won't be on the side of the precipice, and I might turn dizzy and fall over." The traveler said, "How are we going to find another way down?" And Wobblejuice said, "Oh, that is quite easy. I will turn myself into an eagle and fly about till I find one." So he did that, and he found another path by a precipice, but where he could have his blind eye on the outside, so that the precipice wouldn't make him dizzy. So that was all right, and they got to the bottom of the mountain. Well, when they got home again, the traveler found he had plenty to write a very interesting book about, and people would pay him plenty of money for it, because he was the first traveler who had ever had a servant who could turn himself into any animal he liked, and they would be interested to read about that. But he didn't want a servant any more, because his landlady cooked his meals for him and made his bed, and her little girl cleaned his boots for him, and he often gave her sixpence for it. So he said to Wobblejuice, "I am very sorry, but I'm afraid I shall have to give you a month's notice, because I don't want a servant who can turn himself into any animal he likes while I'm in London. He would be of no use to me." And Wobblejuice said, "Oh, I don't know about that. I could turn myself into a horse, and when you are tired of writing your book, you could go for a ride on me." And the traveler said, "That isn't a bad idea. I like riding, and it would save hiring a horse, so perhaps I could afford to keep you on. I don't really want to get rid of you, because we have had some very interesting times together, and it will be nice to talk about them in the evenings." So they did that, and when the traveler had written his book, plenty of people bought it to read, because it was very interesting, and he made plenty of money out of it. And what was nice about him was that he gave Wobblejuice some of the money, because he said, "You were quite useful to me in my travels, and it is only fair." And Wobblejuice turned himself into a cocker spaniel and licked his hand, because it was the best way of showing how pleased he really was. The end.